The PlayStation Direct was so bad, I couldn't even finish watching it. So I don't have the entire experience. How could I possibly? This thing went on for over an hour, and it was just the same game shown over and over again. You know, there's all these things I could talk about the showcase, about like this or that, or like all these no-effort games that are coming out on Switch 2 anyway. There's a lot of things I could talk about, but the thing I find interesting about this is just the huge discrepancy between what happened between this showcase and the third-party showcase, right? You know, Nintendo's Partner Direct. Because one of the big hopes we saw when it came to the Partner Showcase was this idea that, like, oh yeah, we've seen this game before, we've seen this already, these are games coming to PlayStation, these are games that, like, we don't need to see again, you know, we wanted to see new things. Okay, that was the narrative with the showcase, especially when it came to games like Resident Evil 9 and Pragmata. Okay, I want you to think about that as we, like, talk about this, because what happened is that PlayStation showed off the same games that were already shown off in the third-party Direct, and suddenly there's just this endless, like, all this hype, all this attention, all this praise. Resident Evil 9 looks so good. Oh, Pragmata looks so original. No consideration at all for the fact that we've seen these already. You know, no appreciation at all for the fact that these games are coming out day and date on Switch 2. You know, no thought at all is put into, like, the massive double standards. How the same games are shown off first during a Nintendo Direct, but get the real hype and attention during the PlayStation Showcase. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that there is industry bias against Nintendo. Because when you take the PlayStation ports and the multi-plat games into consideration, the Switch 2 is killing it right now, okay? They've had tons of games released over the past several months. You know, you have things like Dynasty Warriors Origins. You have things like Final Fantasy VII Remake. You have games like Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. Like, you know, these really well-received, popular third-party games, right? But, you know, the narrative when it comes to the Switch 2 versions of these games is always this, like, weird narrative. This weird cope. Like, I already played that. You know, every single time you see this happen. But then, when it comes to games like Pragmata and RE9, games that are coming out day and date with the PlayStation version, you know, the narrative becomes like, oh yeah, her hair looks slightly off in the Switch 2 version. This game will never be as good on Switch 2 as it is on PlayStation. Oh, I've already seen this trailer before. Nobody cares. Like, you see the desperation. Like, you see the seething. You see the blatant attempts at desperately trying to control the narrative. Desperately trying to gaslight people into thinking that Nintendo is struggling or that they can't compete with PlayStation, when in actuality, they're dominating. When all of these major tentpole PlayStation franchises are getting released day and date with the Switch 2 version, with the PlayStation version, and you're seeing people, like, still try and complain about it. You know, it's getting so bad that the only company I think is still giving PlayStation any kind of preference is Konami. And if Konami is your big, like, you know, partner going forward, you're completely finished, okay? You're screwed, okay? Konami, what are they going to do? Produce a Yu-Gi-Oh! RPG? Like, what are they going to do? Like, make a new 3D Castlevania? Konami is done. Like, they've been finished for over a decade. And the fact that they keep trying to make Silent Hill come back, I think is going to put an end to, like, the narrative that Silent Hill is, like, the peak of horror video game culture, okay? Like, again, instead of having this mystique of being this, like, really obscure, like, PS2 classic that you can't get a hold of nowadays, you know, they keep putting out more Silent Hills, and more and more people are going to get fed up with the modern formula. That's going to be the reality behind a modern Silent Hill, I think. So again, like, you know, I'm a Castlevania fan. You know, the new Castlevania game looks like shit. Like, you know, and you have, you know, Metal Gear Like oh yeah, we up-res the games on the Master Collection. They are trying to sell you 2 games in a collection. Neither of them are that good, and it was just kind of baffling to me. Like, what do you mean you don't have Rising in there? You don't have Rising bundled in with Metal Gear Solid 4? Really? Like, are you serious? You can't put in some of the Game Boy games. You can't put in it's like, what are they doing? What are they doing? There was nothing in this presentation that was good or interesting. And, you're seeing a lot of people come out and try and say that, well, God of War, they're remaking that, and that's going to be good. Yeah, they're remaking it so they can make it woke and, censor it. That's it. That's the reality behind the God of War remakes. Nobody should be excited about this at all, honestly. And what we're seeing is just this weird attempts at trying to gaslight you into thinking PlayStation is still competitive. What you're seeing is a desperate attempt to try and gaslight you into thinking these third-party games are only going to be successful on Nintendo consoles. Because that's I think that's what's been happening since the Switch generation, is that the entire narrative that you only buy a console for Nintendo games has completely collapsed. Third-party games are having massive success on Switch, if they get released on it. And it's becoming harder and harder to justify going with, the PlayStation exclusivity. And even if a company, like Square, makes a AAA game, that, pushes the hardware to the limits, these games take, a decade to make now. So, in theory, they could produce a game for PS5 right now, spend a decade producing it, and by the time it comes out, oops, the new Nintendo console's out. There's just nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do to stop themselves from supporting Nintendo. What's more, we're seeing more and more that the audience for the good third-party games pretty much exclusively have a strong Nintendo fan base. Resident Evil, Square, Final Fantasy, classic RPGs. These are exclusively Nintendo things. It's been kind of interesting kind of seeing the transition between, Atelier, Trails, and Ys being, these PlayStation exclusive things, and then seeing them get this, very strong audience on Nintendo hardware. This isn't something that I think, other people can really wrap their heads around or understand. That's the reality behind it, right? I think is that Nintendo is just dominating the industry right now, and there's this very strong refusal to admit it. And this is a very good example as to why. This was the worst Nintendo Direct ever. Awful Direct, and it was still better than what PlayStation did. PlayStation put their best foot forward, and they got completely mogged by Nintendo this presentation. That's just the reality of it, is that they put their best foot forward, and this was the end result.